I'll never forget the when my brother was killed in a car accident, and I was 25 years old, and I went to the hospital to identify the body. They did that back then, and I walked into the hospital, and I was lost. I mean, I had no idea what to do, where to go. I was just totally emotionally lost, and yet I was the one that my family was looking to. My dad was on the 5th floor of the hospital in traction, having had an accident previously, and so devastated. And my pastor that I'd worked with, Hugh Monroe, walked up to me. He didn't say anything. He didn't say anything except my name. And he gave me a big hug, put his arms around me and just held me. The best thing that he could have done.
Yep.
No words were needed. No, as you said, no words could have fixed it. But when it comes to loss and progression through life and those losses, I don't think it's until recently we start to compare the grief in that and the transitions, and that's one of the reasons why we do this Senior Flicks, is so that people who are seniors can tell their story and share that and have the cathartic experience of sharing that in a meaningful way with others who need to know, and the families sometimes don't realize the need to know until later.
They don't. There's a couple of terms that talk specifically about loss and grief that are connected to non-death. So one of them, and you're right, that for years, even in the theory part of it, in the professional level of theory, it wasn't until the 60s where we started to see allowing non-death experiences of loss to be treated as grief the same as, not the same as, but on the same level as death loss.
Right.
So the two terms that are really significant, one of them is called chronic sorrow. And that's a fairly new concept within the last 20 years or so. Susan Ruse was actually the one that I connected with. She did her PhD thesis on that chronic sorrow back in the 80s. And she was very helpful to me to understand this. And there's a Greek word that can be translated in basically as heavy heart, or unanswered grief.
Right.
And there are things in life where we live with this loss in our face all the time. So parents who have had a child who is born with a disability, who will not have the opportunity to engage in all areas of life the way children without that disability would engage.
Right.
And no parent would say to me, oh, it's horrible, it's terrible. What I hear from parents in that are, you know what, my child has taught me so much about life, and I believe that.
Right.
But what I also recognize is there's a grief that every parent lives with, knowing my child is never going to experience this, or my child is never going to get to know about this.
Yes.
And we can't talk about it, because then people would think that we're not grateful, or we're, how it is.
Right,
what the truth
right.
is so we hide that. But that's that chronic sorrow. There's also, that's true for birth mothers who give up a child for adoption.
Right.
That they live their life not knowing how that child is doing. Right. It's with adoptive children. So all of these areas. So the last year of my private practice, about 60% of my clients were individuals with disabilities, because I was fascinated with that grief. I also specialized in adoption. And I understand that term, that chronic sorrow, there are things in life, it can also be our own medical issues that
Right.
don't allow us to participate.
Right.
And this happens, and that can happen as we age, but it can also happen, throughout life.
Right.
So there's a chronic sorrow that we live with. We can't talk about that very
Right.
much.
Right.
But it's a huge grief loss. The other one is called an ambiguous loss. And that's where, and I think it's very, for parents who have, or children who have, so for parents who have a child who's addicted, either with drugs or alcohol,
Right.
or a child who has a parent who's addicted.
Right.
There is this ambiguous loss where we talk about two alternatives. Somebody can be physically absent, but psychologically present. So if we look at an addict, for instance, our kids, when they get into their teens and 20s, sometimes they take off. We don't know where they are.
Right.
I have a very good friend who's a pastor who hasn't seen his son for I think 3 years now,
Wow.
and has no idea if he's alive or dead.
Right. Right. Wow.
That is a pain
Yes,
that,
yeah.
that we live with.
Heavens, yeah.
Every day he thinks about him. He's
course.
psychologically present.
Right.
He's physically gone.
Right.
People who are missing, I think refugees, immigration,
Yes, yeah.
those pieces where families are split up. We're not sure where they are.
Right.
The other side of ambiguous grief is where they are physically present but psychologically absent.
Right.
So we're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia,
Right.
and where people are physically with us, but they're not the ones we've known. They're not the same person.
Right,
And I hear people
right.
say that to me. My parent had Alzheimer's, and I've done my grief. Well, you haven't.
Right.
You've done your grief around the living loss,
Right.
but when death happens, that's a different grief.
It is. Yes.
Because even if a person has Alzheimer's and they're living, in a secured facility, and I'm a child, I know where they are. And if I
safe.
want to, I can go and see them.
Yes.
But once death happens,
Yeah.
I've never had the ability to see them physically here
Right.
in this life again.
Right.
So we get confused in those griefs. They're both grief. They're
Right.
both equally difficult.
Right.
But I think it's important to recognize and to validate so that
Right.
I can say to somebody, it's really, I'm really struggling today because I
Right.
miss my mom.
Right.
Even although I know where she is physically,
Right.
I miss my mom not being able to go and have tea or do this or that.
Well, and you nail something there where people say, "So how are you today?" "Oh, I'm great." Right? "I'm fine."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What should they say, really?
Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, and that's I joke a lot about that when I joke. Well, we make comments about that
Right.
when I was with people who are fresh in their grief, because
Right.
So if I do say something, Ron, I
Right.
will say, "How are you today?" Just today.
Right. Right.
Because if I say to somebody, "How are you?"
Yes.
There's no context.
Right.
How do you think I am?
Right,
But if I
right.
can say to you, "How are you today?" as opposed to yesterday,
Yes.
you'll be able to say to me, "Well, today's a better day
Right.
than yesterday," or "Today's a little more difficult today."
Right, right.
So if we can just remember to use that little word added to that phrase,
Today.
it will allow somebody to really honor your question, because
Right,
what you are
right.
really interested in, I really am interested in how you're doing today,
Right.
now.
And if you're not, don't ask the question.
And if you're not interested, don't ask the question.
Right. Right. Because
And
you.
that's
Yeah.
and that's a. So again, how do we come alongside Alan Wolfelt, who has written a number of books and has a huge center for grief improvement in Colorado, and I've brought him into Peterborough actually for a
Right.
seminar. He talks about companioning as the word in the way in which we are to be with somebody in grief.
Okay.
And rather than trying to fix it, we companion. And I would really encourage that word. I come
Right.
alongside. I have to be able to sit with silence,
So that's the presence.
just presence,
Right.
without trying to fix you, make you feel better. Again,
Right.
everybody tries to make, if I say to you, you say, "How are you today?" I say, "Well, I'm having a bad day." And if our immediate response is, "Oh, well, let's go do something to make it better," you have, that you can say that eventually.
Right.
But first of all, you have to say to me,
Yeah.
maybe nothing more than I'm sorry.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Or do you want to talk about it?
Right, yeah, yeah.
But if I jump immediately to try to make it better, that speaks more about my uncomfortable
Yeah.
position. I need to feel, I can't stand being with somebody who's down, so I need to feel better.
Right, right.
So I need to feel better by making you feel better.
And language.
And language.
Is
Oh my gosh.
so important, right?
Isn't that true?
Yeah, yeah. The listening, and you addressed that as well. I think it was Rick Warren's wife who was talking about after when they found out that their son had died by suicide, and friends showed up, and she said they just sat there and they just listened.
Yeah.
And then she made the comment, the deeper the level of grief, the quieter you should be in terms of presence and listening. Just be there.
Right.
And I thought, that's interesting.
I always, and I, before I would go in to meet somebody for the first time in grief or any time, I thought of that space where we were going to sit, much like this,
Right.
as sacred space.
Okay, yeah.
It's sacred space, and I'm the guest.
Right, right.
I'm coming into their space, and I want to listen to their story.
Yeah,
They're not coming into my space,
Right.
even although physically it may be. But the space that they're bringing in is the story of their grief.
right.
And that space is sacred,
Yes,
and it's theirs.
yes.
And I'm there as a witness to whatever they need, to whatever they want to talk about.
Right,
I'm there to witness.
right.
And so often, and that's why I'm not a great fan of the word counseling, in the sense that people come, all people who came were coming looking for an answer. And my beginning point is, I think you have the answer. We need to find that.
Right,
So
right.
tell me the story.
Right,
Tell me about that.
yeah,
Who was that person?
yes,
Let's share that together. And if we could learn to do that, what a
Right,
gift.
right.
What a gift.
So going back to transitioning and grief through life, and that's part of it too, would it not
Oh,
be?
huge.
In terms of, for example, we're at Shepherd Village, and people have left their homes
Yep.
and made this their new home. Some of them,
Right.
it's our apartment buildings or our life lease or retirement or long-term care. Each one of them is somewhat different than the other, but all of them are different than where they were previously.
Exactly.
And so what I'm hearing you say is there's loss, and there's a grieving of that loss, and now let's, as a community, give permission to hear the story,
Right.
to really know the story, and come alongside. And if you don't, you never reach that point of wellness or healing or complete.
I don't think you can ever be at peace at where you are.
Right.
The
That's
truth
better.
is that people who want life to stand still, it doesn't work that way.
Right, right.
Nothing
Right.
is going to last forever.
Right.
Change is part of life.
Yeah.
So we're afraid that if people talk about this part of their life, then they're going to get stuck. We use that word.
Right.
But the truth is that if we can allow that peace, it will allow us to feel a comfort level where we are.
Right, right.
I mean, we're at that age, and Ron, where I realize I can't do what I used to do.
Right, me too. Yes.
You'd laugh, but I mean, we got I ordered the help to take the top off the pickle jar, for Pete's sake.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. I can either fight that.
Yeah.
Or I can jokingly say to my wife, I'm not as strong as I used to be, right? But I can still remember, and I feel sad that I can't open that
That's
stupid
true.
pickle
Yes.
jar.
Yeah.
But I don't let that stop me from opening the jar. I have to find a way to live the way I am now.
Right.
And every stage of our life,
Yeah.
brings us into a new stage of where we are,
Right.
but we leave behind
Right.
what we were.
Right.
Now, you can fight that all you want,
Right.
but you'll never win. It's better if we can allow ourselves to recognize and to validate those losses. And
Right.
some of them are insignificant. Some of them are huge.
Right.
Loss of independence.
Yes.
Loss of the ability to drive your car.
Yep.
Those are huge losses.
Right.
And I think people are quick to try to minimize them in order to make people feel better. I think there's a balance and a tension between acknowledging the loss,
Right.
allowing me to feel my sadness,
Right.
allowing you to witness, and somebody needs to bear witness.
Right.
So can I cry with you about
Yeah.
that? You know, I love my new apartment, but I miss my home. Can I cry about my home?
Right.
And I'll get over that.
Yeah.
And if you can sit with me with that,
Right.
then I can be at peace where I
Yeah.
am.
I know we're probably coming to the end of the session a little bit here. I like what you're saying there. My dad's transition from his home, where he had lost his second wife. Mm-hmm. My stepmother had died, and they had spent her last years there. And it came time for him to move into retirement home. And he was unable to function on his own. One of the things that was extremely difficult for myself, and I should know better, was to identify that need and to walk well through. And there were moments when there was tension, because come on, Dad, you can't live on your own. You're 3 hours away.
Yeah.
I get a phone call at 2:00 in the morning. The plumbing is we got a problem, Ron. Can you come up? Well, Dad, you got to call the plumber. You need to be closer to us as a family. We want you closer. We miss you. It's a long drive. We don't have the time with you. All about us, right? All about our circumstance. And with the seniors in our community here needing for their family, and me eventually coming alongside, look, Dad, I understand.
Yeah.
I need to hear, let's talk about this. And then we moved to stuff, and I said, we're going to put your stuff in storage.
Good.
And whatever it costs,
Yep.
as long as you want it there, it's there.
Yep.
And we'll go down and visit the storage unit and see what you want, and
Right.
so on. So 2 weeks after we had it moved in the storage, I said, Dad, I'm coming down. Let's go take a look at the storage unit. He said, I don't want anything from the storage unit. He said, I don't need to go there.
Right.
And I said, well, are you sure, Dad? Because it was a big
Right.
deal back then,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it was like, the only thing I want is my dad's Bible.
Right.
Can you get that for me and bring it to me? And I did. And the
But
rest
you
of it,
gave
he
him the
said,
choice, right? You weren't just shutting out his life.
Right.
And I
right.
think that's the piece where, so even for couples who've been together for so long and one person
Right,
dies,
right.
I encourage them, no, you don't have to leave things as they are if you want.
Right.
There's no right or wrong.
Right.
I think that allowing whatever time is necessary, and that process is different for every person.
Right.
But allowing them, and the same thing. If somebody dies, well, we're a year from now. Maybe do you want to move some of her clothes out of the closet and put them in a spare closet?
Right. Right.
But
Yes.
don't get rid of them.
Right.
I mean, sometimes kids come in and say,
Quick.
"Oh, Dad, you got to get rid of all this
Clear
stuff."
this out.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
It's
That's
it's
right.
not a problem.
That's right.
As we need to do that, and that's how healthy change happens.
Right.
But what you did, I know we all wish we could do it differently. That's not. But what you did to your dad was you gave him a gift, because you said to him, "I recognize that's important. We're not going to throw it out.
Right.
We're going to put it in storage
Right.
till you decide."
Right.
And that's a wonderful way
Yeah.
of how we can make that. And it's not that people want to hold on to everything.
No,
It's
right.
just that I don't I need to have time to think about that and to process it.
Yes. And it took me a while to understand that.
Yeah,
in
well,
the midst of it. And,
we do.
you know, I sometimes think, well, I probably should have known better, but I definitely know better now. And as I
where did we ever
grow,
learn it? That's the problem, right?
You're
Mom?
right.
Where
And
did we ever talk about it?
Yeah, and that's part of why we're doing this.
Yeah.
You know, this conversation.
I hope so.
And I hope that, and we will be coming back for another session. But was there anything else you wanted to add to this that we're talking about right now?
Just, again, to emphasize to people that grief is part of our life. It's not something that's wrong with you.
Right.
And that if you will honor it,
Right.
and if you will, you know, make it something that you're not pushing away all the
Right.
time,
Right.
but you will honor it, and you will find that it won't always feel the way it does now.
Right.
People are afraid. They say to me, if I start crying, I'll never stop. And then, yes, you will. You
Right.
will.
Right.
And so if we can do those things, and there is no, I can't tell you when, time is different for every person, for every
Right.
grief experience.
Right.
But if we can do that, it will feel different. And we can honor it and never forget it.
Right.
Find a way to honor it.
Right.
And put it into a place of your story. My story is written with grief, part of it. Your story
Yes.
has grief.
Yeah.
It's in there with all the joy and
Yes.
the laughter and everything
Absolutely,
else.
yes.
But
Yeah.
it's as valid in my life as anything else is.
Right.
So rather than trying to shut it away, and I wish we had time, maybe another time we can talk about, you know, how I'm a bit concerned that COVID has shut down our ability to do public mourning in a way that I think those
Yes.
funeral rituals
Right.
really are part of
Right.
how we honor our grief over time.
Right.
And I really encourage people, and sometimes, you know, when seniors are making their wishes known, they're saying, you know, I don't want anything, don't do anything. They're saying that about themselves, but what do we need? We're the
Right.
living. We
Right.
need to find a time to gather together to
Right.
publicly express what this grief means to
Yes.
us. And funerals and the funeral rituals
Right.
and those public rituals
Right.
are really significant. So I really encourage not to shut those out,
Right.
and to put pressure on people to have nothing.
Right.
I think that's a whole other story that we could talk about
Well,
sometime.
let's come back to that in another session, because the next session that we want to do, I think, sort of lends itself that way as well. And I think that's a good way to start that.
Okay.
But
Thank
I want
you
to
so
thank you,
much.
David.
Thank you.
And really enjoyed that visit with you. And thanks for sharing with us. Thank you for, again, being there as a friend
Thank
and
you.
someone who's listened and actually given good counsel and good support to me and my friends and my family. And I think we've been rewarded because of that.